The fluorescent lights of the Sterling Solutions office hummed a tune of corporate despair. It was a low, buzzing drone that promised headaches and existential dread, the official soundtrack to cubicle life. I, Ren Porter, was hearing it for the last time. My cardboard box, filled with a sad little fern and a coffee mug that said, "Don't talk to me until I've overridden this mug's firmware," sat on my cleared-out desk. "Seriously, Ren? You're actually quitting?" Brad, my now former manager, leaned against the partition of my cubicle. He had that smug, perpetually constipated look of a man who thought climbing the corporate ladder was a personality trait. His tie was too tight, his suit was too shiny, and his breath smelled faintly of the cheap coffee he championed as a cost-saving measure. "Yep," I said, not looking up from my phone where I was coordinating the final wire transfer. "The last of my 401k, liquidated. The last of my tech stocks, sold. Everything was being converted into cold, hard, wonderfully anonymous cash. The banking system was about to become a historical artifact, and these idiots were still worried about quarterly reports." Brad scoffed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "This is career suicide, man. You're one of our best coders. You've got a clear path to senior developer. Instead, you're throwing it all away. For what? Some vague, personal project." He made air quotes with his fingers, a gesture I found deeply, primally annoying. I finally looked up, letting my gaze drift over his self-satisfied face. "Oh, Brad, if only you knew, the personal project was called Not Dying Horribly in the First 72 Hours. It was a bit of a passion project." "Something like that," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. It was a genuine smile. The sheer, blissful ignorance of everyone around me was a comedy of cosmic proportions, and I had a front row seat. They were all extras in a disaster movie, busy arguing about their lines, completely unaware the monster was already cresting the hill. "Well, don't come crawling back when it fails," he said, puffing out his chest. "Some of us have plans. I just put a down payment on the new Kestrel EV. The performance model, 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. He grinned, expecting me to be impressed. "A Kestrel EV, a four-wheeled, battery-powered coffin. Cute. All that sophisticated electronics would be a paperweight in about 36 hours, once the Phase 2 atmospheric events started kicking in." I just nodded slowly. My brain, the same one that had spent a full year beta testing the end of the world, was a beautiful, hyper-efficient machine. It was already running the numbers. The Kestrel EV, with its advanced computer systems, would be one of the first things to get fried by the initial electromagnetic pulse. A six-figure lawn ornament. "Nice," I said, my voice flat. "Enjoy the ride, Brad." The utter lack of envy, the dead calm finality in my voice, seemed to bother him more than any argument would have. His grin faltered. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a second, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. He saw someone who wasn't playing the same game as him. He couldn't comprehend it, so he dismissed it, shaking his head as if I were a particularly baffling bug in the code. He walked away, off to brag to someone else about his soon-to-be useless hunk of metal. I picked up my box and walked out of Sterling Solutions without a single look back. The air outside was thick with the late summer humidity of the city, a soupy mixture of car exhaust and unfulfilled dreams. For everyone else, it was just another Tuesday. For me, it was T-minus 24 hours. My first stop wasn't a sporting goods store or a supermarket. That was amateur hour. People fighting over the last can of beans and a roll of toilet paper? Pathetic. My strategy, honed over a year of virtual apocalyptic trial and error, was what I like to call, strip the shell, take the core. I drove my beat-up, nondescript pickup truck, no fancy electronics, a simple carbureted engine I could fix with a wrench and a curse word, to the industrial outskirts of the city. Here, at a series of prepaid, anonymously rented storage units, my real work began. For the past week, I had been a ghost, a phantom of logistics. Using burner phones and stacks of cash, I had made deals with wholesale suppliers, the kind that sell to factories, not people. The first truck arrived. It wasn't filled with cans of soup, it was filled with half-ton pallets of industrial-grade whey protein isolate powder in stark white bags. Next came the dextrose, pure glucose, in 50-pound sacks. Then, the iodized salt, the dehydrated vegetable powders, the multivitamins in barrels the size of beer kegs. I wasn't hoarding food, I was hoarding the fundamental building blocks of nutrition. With this, my hidden crafting bench interface, and some water, I could manufacture nutrition bars that would make a military MRE look like a sad, flavorless cracker. I could sustain myself for a decade. Let them fight over Cheetos. A second truck delivered massive drums of refined cooking oil and industrial vinegar. A third brought medical supplies, not little first aid kits, but wholesale boxes of intravenous bags, surgical staples, broad-spectrum antibiotics, and cases upon cases of iodine and isopropyl alcohol. The guys I hired to unload it all were paid so much in cash they didn't ask a single question. They just saw a weirdly calm, slightly grinning guy paying them triple the going rate to stack boring supplies in a bunch of hot, stuffy warehouses. They probably thought I was some doomsday prepper nutjob. They weren't wrong, but they were also missing the glorious, beautiful scale of it. While they worked, I scrolled through the news on my phone. The headlines were a symphony of obliviousness. Stocks were up, a new celebrity couple was on the rocks, and there, tucked away in the international section, was a small article. A joint international research station in Antarctica had gone dark. Just offline. A government spokesperson blamed a catastrophic equipment failure due to unforeseen solar flare activity. I had to physically restrain myself from laughing out loud. Solar flare. Right. I knew exactly what that equipment failure was. I'd seen it in the beta. That wasn't a solar flare, it was the boot up sequence. The system was waking up, and the Antarctic was its G-spot. The energy pulse was like the opening chime of a video game, and only I could hear it. Online, on the darkest corners of tech forums I frequented, a few posts about a project codenamed Gaia's Cradle had popped up, talking about a massive data leak. They were scrubbed clean within minutes, dismissed as conspiracy theories. Leak? No, honey, that's not a leak, it's the launch trailer. Back at my high-rise apartment, I ignored the stink eye from my neighbor, Jessica. She was an influencer, which meant her primary contribution to society was pouting at her phone. She was currently taking a selfie in the hallway, one hand on her hip, her face a mask of practiced vacancy. She was probably captioning it, just another grind day #bossbabe, completely unaware that the only grinding in her near future would involve her bones being pulverized by a wanderer. Inside my apartment, the final stage of my pregame prep began. I wasn't fortifying it for a long-term stay. This place was a temporary launchpad, nothing more, but I wouldn't be caught with my pants down. From under my bed, I pulled out several lengths of custom-cut, hardened steel bars and a set of heavy-duty bolts. I popped the cheap, standard-issue door frame casing off with a crowbar. Inside the hollow space, I carefully fitted the steel bars, reinforcing the wood from within. I drilled new holes through the frame and into the steel and concrete building structure itself, then secured the door hinges and the lock strike plate with the 8-inch bolts. When I was done, I popped the wooden casing back on. To the naked eye, my front door looked exactly the same. Boring, standard, but I had just transformed it from a flimsy piece of wood into a miniature bank vault door. It wouldn't stop a battering ram, but it would sure as hell stop a desperate neighbor or a low-level zombie trying to shoulder its way in. It was a simple, elegant piece of engineering, directly from the Beginner's Fortification page of my mental beta test encyclopedia. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the city, the sky began to do something weird. Ribbons of green and pink light, an aurora, began to dance in the twilight. It wasn't supposed to be visible this far south. It was beautiful. On the street below, people were stopping, pointing their phones up, capturing the anachronistic spectacle. They saw beauty. I saw the sky's graphical user interface glitching out before a major software update. It was the prettiest death sentence I'd ever seen. The rest of the evening was quiet. I ate a final, decadent meal of steak and potatoes, a farewell to the old world's simple luxuries. I took a long, hot shower, knowing clean, pressurized hot water was about to become a currency more valuable than gold. Then, I sat in the dark, looking out my window at the glittering expanse of the city. A billion lights, a billion dreams, all on a countdown timer. I felt a strange tremor of excitement, a little buzz of anxiety mixed with the thrill of absolute certainty. The world was holding its breath. My phone, lying screen up on the table, remained dark. 11:58 p.m. 11:59 p.m. The city hummed on, a gigantic, sleeping beast, utterly unaware of the knife hanging over its neck. Then, the clock on my phone ticked over. 12 a.m. For a moment, nothing happened. The world remained the same. A tiny, irrational flicker of doubt pricked at me. What if I was wrong? What if I had just thrown my entire life away for a delusion, a year-long psychotic break induced by a video game? And then, it happened. My phone screen lit up, not with a notification, but with a color I knew intimately. A deep, blood-red glow filled my dark apartment. White text, stark and terrifyingly familiar, resolved itself on the screen. Gaia's Cradle is now live. Welcome back, player. Beta Tester Legacy Package has been delivered to your inventory. A new icon, one invisible to anyone but me, now pulsed gently in the corner of my vision. A stylized backpack. The game had begun, and this time there was no respawn. The world outside my window had begun its grand, final performance. The opening act was a symphony of stupid, a chaotic orchestra of car alarms, distant sirens, and the high-pitched shrieks of people realizing the rules no longer applied. I pulled the blackout curtains shut. The noise was distracting. My apartment, the one I'd be ditching in a few hours, was an oasis of silence. Outside, society was having a fatal heart attack. Inside, I was like a kid on Christmas morning. In the corner of my vision, the new icon pulsed with a gentle, proprietary light only I could see. A stylized backpack, the Quantum Fold backpack, my beta tester legacy. I focused on it, and a translucent blue screen shimmered into existence before my eyes. Inventory, crafting, analysis, world map, offline. A giddy, slightly unhinged laugh escaped my lips. It was real, all of it. The year I'd spent glued to a VR harness, thinking I was playing the most immersive game ever created, was actually the most important final exam in human history. And I was the only one who got the answer sheet. I tapped on inventory. It was mostly empty, save for one glowing, ornate chest. Beta Tester Legacy Package, the Trailblazer's Inheritance. With a mental command, I opened it. Seed of the World Tree, X1, has been added to your inventory. Stream of Purity, Seed, X1, has been added to your inventory. Ore Vein of Renewal, Seed, X1, has been added to your inventory. Universal Crafter module has been installed. Static Preservation module has been installed. Analysis module has been installed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of pure, unadulterated power. Food, water, and rare metals, not just a stash, but a self-sustaining, infinite source. While the rest of the world would soon be killing each other for a can of expired cat food, I'd be complaining that my magic bread tree was producing too many baguettes and not enough sourdough. The sheer, beautiful unfairness of it all was intoxicating. A flicker of movement on my laptop caught my eye. The live news feed I had up was glitching horribly. A terrified-looking news anchor was trying to talk over shaky cell phone footage of a man in a business suit mindlessly chewing on a fallen woman's arm. The signal cut out, replaced by a blue screen. The internet was gone. I tried my phone. No signal. The old world's nervous system had just been severed. Money in the bank? It was just a memory now. A fine, grayish dust began to drift down outside, coating the windows like a film of ash. It wasn't radioactive, not yet. I knew from the beta that this was the Gloomfall. It was harmless, but it carried microscopic spores that would, in about a week, start making people feel a deep, crushing despair. Step 1 in breaking the survivor's morale. Cute. Time to work. My first power, the one I'd used most in the chaotic early days of the test server, was Protocol Rewriter. It was the most basic application of my status as a system anomaly. The ability to issue a simple command to a non-sentient object. I looked at the heavy-duty padlock on my storage closet door. Protocol. Unlocked, I whispered, focusing my intent. Click. The shackle on the padlock sprang open with a quiet, satisfying snap. A 5-minute cooldown timer appeared in my HUD, a small, transparent number counting down. The feeling was incredible. It wasn't magic, it was administration rights. I was no longer just a user in this world. I was a junior SYS admin. My goal for day 1 was simple: pharmaceuticals and tools. Food was for later. I already had the building blocks for literal tons of nutrition bars hoarded in my storage units. Right now, I needed the things that would become impossibly rare: antibiotics, surgical tools, high-efficiency solar panels, and every power tool I could get my hands on. I slung a worn duffel bag over my shoulder, a prop, really, to avoid looking too conspicuous, and headed for the door. Just as my hand touched the knob, a frantic, pounding rhythm erupted from the other side. Ren, open the door. I know you're in there. I sighed. It was Karen. Of course, it was Karen. My downstairs neighbor, the self-appointed queen of the homeowners association, a woman whose entire personality was a composite of noise complaints and passive-aggressive notes left on people's cars. I opened the door a crack, my face a mask of bored indifference. She stood there, her face blotchy with fear and exertion, her two spoiled kids hiding behind her legs. Her husband, a doughy man named Gary, stood a few feet back, wringing his hands. "Thank God," she gasped, trying to push the door open wider. I didn't let it budge. "Listen, Ren, things are crazy out there. People are attacking each other. We need to leave the city. You have that big truck. You're going to drive us to my sister's place upstate." It wasn't a request. It was a demand, wrapped in the thin veil of panicked desperation. She, who had once filed a formal complaint because my walking around my own apartment at 8 p.m. was disrupting her tranquility, was now demanding I be her personal chauffeur. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Oh," I said, my voice flat. "And why would I do that?" Her face twisted in disbelief. "What do you mean, why? We're neighbors. It's about community. We have to help each other." "Community," I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. I let my eyes drift over her. "Karen, last Tuesday you threatened to have my truck towed because the tire was touching the line of my parking space. The community you're talking about only seems to exist when you need something." Panic was quickly being replaced by her default setting, entitled rage. "How dare you? My children are terrified. You have the means to help. You are morally obligated to help. What kind of monster are you?" I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper. "The kind of monster who really hates loud noises, Karen. And you, my dear neighbor, are being incredibly loud." I gave her a smile that didn't reach my eyes. It was a predator's smile. I looked past her, at the dull gray metal door of her own apartment. My cooldown timer for protocol rewriter had just hit 0. "Perfect. You know what? You're right," I said, my smile widening. "You should be somewhere safe. Inside your home, for instance. Like the authorities on TV were saying before the signal died." I focused my intent on her door. Protocol. Fuse shut. A low, resonant thrum vibrated through the hallway, a sound so deep it was felt more than heard. The steel door of Karen's apartment visibly shuddered for a split second. The lock, the hinges, the frame, they were now one solid, welded piece of metal. I stepped back inside my apartment. "There," I said cheerfully through the crack. "I helped you stay inside. Safe and sound. You're welcome." I slammed the door shut, locking the 3 heavy-duty deadbolts I'd installed. Her indignant screeching was cut short, replaced by a series of confused, metallic clangs as she tried to open a door that no longer functioned as a door. Then came the true screaming, the terrified, trapped kind, as she realized what had happened. It was music to my ears. Ignoring her, I headed down the emergency stairwell. Out in the city, the chaos was beautiful in its own way. Cars were piled up in intersections, their owners either dead, fled, or transformed. A few of the wanderers, the stage 1 zombies, were shambling aimlessly, drawn to the sounds of screams and crashes. They were slow, stupid, and no real threat if you were paying attention. They were just the tutorial level. My old, reliable pickup truck was exactly where I'd left it. As I started the simple, non-electronic engine, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call, it was a local broadcast from a military emergency frequency that my phone, for some reason, could now pick up. "Repeat, all civilians, shelter in place. Avoid major highways. I-95 is a parking lot. We are seeing, my God, hostile individuals are attracted to loud noises and bright lights. Do not engage. I repeat, do not." The signal devolved into static. A small smile touched my lips as I pulled out of the parking garage. As I drove, I saw him. Brad, my old manager. His brand new, 6-figure Kestrel EV was wedged between a city bus and a flaming taco truck. Its windows were smashed, and Brad himself was curled up underneath it, sobbing. The ultimate symbol of his old-world status, his pride and joy, was now just a metal cage in a traffic jam from hell. I didn't even slow down. "Enjoy the ride, Brad." My destination was a massive pharmaceutical distribution warehouse in the industrial district. The place was a fortress of concrete and steel, but its security was designed to stop guys with bolt cutters, not guys who could speak to locks. Protocol. Open, I commanded the main shutter lock. It clicked open. Protocol. Deactivate, I said to the keypad for the alarm system. It went dead. Inside, it was a paradise. Aisles upon aisles of medical supplies, stretching into the gloom. I didn't bother with a cart. I simply walked down an aisle, holding my hand out, and focused on the mental icon of my backpack. Inventory. Absorb radius. It felt like a silent, invisible vortex erupting from my palm. Boxes of amoxicillin, ciprofloxacin, and doxycycline vanished from the shelves. Surgical kits, sutures, scalpels, hemostats, gone. Entire pallets of iodine, rubbing alcohol, and hydrogen peroxide disappeared into the void of my inventory. It was the most satisfying thing I had ever experienced. I was a human black hole for supplies. Let them fight over the dregs in a Walgreens. I was taking the entire damn supply chain. As I moved deeper into the warehouse, a specific section caught my eye. A caged-off area labeled Experimental and Trials. Most of it was empty, but on a forgotten shelf in the back, covered in a thin layer of dust, sat a single, refrigerated metal case. As I approached, the analysis module in my HUD pinged. Special item detected. T03 neuroinhibitor prototype batch. Item class: experimental bioagent. Description: a failed military project intended to temporarily suppress higher brain function in enemy combatants without killing them. Trial results were unpredictable, decommissioned and forgotten. Primary effect: unknown. Secondary effects: unknown. Warning: this item did not exist in the beta test parameters. Its interaction with the Gaia system is entirely unknown. Handle with extreme caution. I stared at the box. This was new. A curveball, something I hadn't planned for. A flutter of genuine uncertainty, the first I'd felt all day, sparked in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was excitement. The game had a secret. With a grin, I reached out and let the quantum fold backpack suck the cold metal case into its silent, timeless depths. The world might be ending, but for me, things were just starting to get interesting. By day 3, the building had started to smell. It was a complex, layered aroma you'd never find in a scented candle aisle. The base note was rotting food from 100 dead refrigerators, a thick, sweet-sour perfume of spoiled meat and liquefied vegetables. Layered on top was the sharp, coppery tang of things I didn't want to think too hard about in the hallways, all underscored by the faint, earthy scent of the ever-present gloomfall dust. The symphony of stupid from day 1 had faded. The screams died down, replaced by a tense, waiting silence, punctuated only by the wet, guttural groans of the wanderers outside. The last drop of water sputtered from my kitchen faucet. It hung there for a moment, a perfect little jewel of civilization's last rites, before falling with a dull plink into the sink. For everyone else in this building, that was the sound of a countdown timer hitting 0. For me, it was just an inconvenience I'd get around to solving. I was busy. My living room looked like a madman's workshop. I'd torn the expensive Italian leather off my L-shaped sofa, a purchase I'd regretted the moment my first credit card bill arrived, and laid it out on the floor. I focused my intent, and the crafting interface shimmered to life in my vision. Scan material. High-grade upholstery leather. Analysis complete. Potential blueprints. TIER1 light leather jerkin, TIER1 protective bracers, scraps. I selected the jerkin. A faint blue outline projected itself onto the leather, a perfect cutting pattern. My kitchen knives were useless, so I'd taken all my cheap stainless steel cutlery, a hideous wedding gift from an aunt I hated, tossed it into a metal pot, and used the crafter's basic, smelt, function. The result was a palm-sized, glowing ingot of surprisingly decent alloy. 5 minutes and another blueprint later, I had a set of 3 perfectly balanced, razor-sharp throwing knives. The crafter didn't need a forge or a 1,000-degree flame, it just needed raw materials and my will. It broke the rules of physics, and I loved it for that. With my new knife, I cut the leather along the glowing lines. It was a strange, satisfying feeling, like assembling a piece of preordained IKEA furniture in the middle of the apocalypse. While the crafter was magically stitching the pieces together, I practiced. I held up one of my old, expired credit cards. Useless plastic. I focused, narrowing my thoughts down to a single, sharp concept. Protocol. Sharpen, I whispered. For a split second, the edge of the card shimmered with a dangerous, glassy light. I flicked it at a nearby cardboard box. It didn't bounce off, it sliced a clean, 3-inch gash before embedding itself halfway through. A 5-second timer appeared in my HUD next to the effect, then blinked out. The card dropped to the floor, once again just a harmless piece of plastic. The cooldown for Protocol Rewriter began its 5-minute countdown. It was limited, but the possibilities were hilarious. A killer paper cut, literally. A sheet of paper with a rigid attribute could be a temporary shield. A pebble with the incendiary tag could be a fire starter. I was a wizard whose magic ran on programmer logic. The city's last vestiges of normalcy were dying. I could hear a faint, crackling voice from a battery-powered radio someone had on in a nearby apartment. It was some amateur broadcasting from his basement, talking about a safe zone at the city stadium. It was a lie, of course. A week from now, that stadium would be a slaughterhouse, a giant bowl of human chow for the things to come. The misinformation was just as dangerous as the monsters. A soft knock came at my door. Too soft to be a threat. It was the knock of someone trying to appear weak, non-threatening. I already knew who it was before I looked through the peephole. Vanessa, and, trailing a few steps behind her like a kicked puppy, Chad. Oh, this was going to be good. Vanessa, my ex, the one who had dumped me 6 months ago with a speech that was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive cliches. I was lacking ambition. I was too comfortable. I didn't have a 5-year plan. Her 5-year plan, apparently, involved immediately hooking up with Chad, a crypto bro whose entire personality was his dad's money and a leased Kestrel EV. The same EV I'd seen smashed to pieces on the highway a couple of days ago. They looked like hell. Her designer clothes were stained and torn. Her perfectly styled hair was a greasy, matted mess. Chad, the former picture of smug confidence, looked like he hadn't slept in a year. His eyes were wide, twitching, darting at every shadow in the hallway. I opened the door, leaning against the frame with a relaxed air I knew would infuriate them. Well, I said. Look what the cat dragged in. And what the dog that dragged in the cat then threw up. Vanessa flinched but forced a wobbly smile. Ren, thank God you're okay. I was okay 5 minutes ago, I replied, my eyes flicking over to Chad, who refused to meet my gaze. Before my day was interrupted by ghosts of poor financial and romantic decisions past. Please, Ren, she said, her voice taking on that whiny, pleading tone she used to use when she wanted me to pay for a vacation she couldn't afford. We haven't had any water since this morning. And we're out of food. I knew you always kept your pantry stocked. Remember how I used to tease you about being a paranoid prepper? She tried a little laugh. It came out as a strangled sob. You were right. You were right about everything. The desperation was rolling off them in waves. It was pathetic. And delicious. We were just wondering, she continued, taking a hesitant step forward. If you could spare just anything. A bottle of water? A can of soup? For old time's sake. Old times, sake. The time she called my programming job a dead-end hobby. The time Chad cornered me in the parking garage to tell me to stop bothering Vanessa, as if I'd even looked at her since she left. A slow smile spread across my face. You know what? You're right. We have history. Hang on a sec. I left the door open and turned back into my apartment. I could feel their eyes on my back, burning with a desperate, pathetic hope. I mentally accessed my backpack's inventory. The static preservation module meant everything inside was in a state of perfect, timeless stasis. I selected one item, then another. They materialized in my hand with a faint shimmer only I could see. First, a bottle of crisp, cold Icelandic glacier water. Condensation beaded on its sides, a miracle in this hot, stuffy building. Second, a loaf of bread. Not just any bread, it was from the seed of the world tree. A prototype I'd baked up this morning using the crafter. It was still warm to the touch, its crust perfectly golden, smelling of yeast and honey and a kind of wholesome goodness that didn't exist in the world anymore. I walked back to the doorway. Their eyes locked onto the food and water like they were the Holy Grail. Chad actually took a half step forward, his tongue darting out to wet his lips. I held up the bottle. Thirsty? I asked, my voice gentle. Vanessa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Yes, please, Ren. So thirsty. I gave them a bright, friendly smile. Then, with a loud crack, I twisted the cap off the water bottle. I put it to my lips and began to drink. I didn't gulp it down. I drank slowly, deliberately, letting out a soft sigh of pleasure after a particularly long mouthful. I could feel their stunned silence. I drank half the bottle before stopping. Ah, that's the stuff, I said, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. Then I took the loaf of bread. I tore a huge piece off. The sound of the crust crackling was like a gunshot in the silent hallway. I brought it to my nose, inhaled the divine aroma dramatically, and took a bite. It was the best bread I had ever tasted. I chewed slowly, thoughtfully, watching their faces contort from hope to confusion, and then to enraged, impotent despair. I finished the piece of bread, took another long, slow drink of water, and then looked directly at Vanessa. "This," I said, holding up the half-eaten loaf and the half-empty bottle. "This is my future. So, tell me, where's yours?" I didn't wait for an answer. I took one last swig of water, emptying the bottle, and then casually tossed the empty plastic container at their feet. It clattered on the grimy floor with a hollow, mocking sound. Then I slammed the door in their faces and threw the 3 deadbolts. The sound was final. I heard a choked gasp from the other side, followed by Chad's voice, a low, furious hiss. "That son of a bitch. That goddamn son of a bitch." I leaned my back against the door, a wide, genuine grin splitting my face. The satisfaction was a warm glow spreading through my chest, better than any drug. This was better than revenge. This was proof. Proof that their world, the one built on social status and empty promises and stock portfolios, was ash. My world, the one I'd been preparing for without even knowing it, was just beginning. Ignoring their eventual, shuffling retreat, I went to work on my water problem. I pulled the magnetron from my broken microwave, a handful of capacitors and wiring from an old laptop, and a cheap plastic pitcher. I scanned them all into the crafter. A new, custom blueprint appeared in my mind, not one from the system, but one I conceived myself. Miniature centrifugal water purifier, power source, hand crank or battery. 10 minutes later, I had a working device. I siphoned some murky, questionable water from the building's main water heater tank into a bucket and poured it into my new gadget. I attached a portable power bank, and with a low hum, a trickle of perfectly clear, clean water began to drip from the outlet spout. Luxury. Absolute, unimaginable luxury. While my purifier hummed away, I looked out the window. The fog was thicker tonight, a rolling, gray blanket that swallowed the streetlights. Through it, I could see movement. The wanderers weren't just shambling aimlessly anymore. 3 of them were clustered together, moving down the street with a shared, twitchy purpose. A small change, but a significant one. They were learning, evolving. The tutorial was picking up the pace. And then I heard it. A noise from down the hall, near the stairwell. Voices, low and angry. "Gotta have a effing supermarket in there. You saw that bread." That was Chad's voice, high-pitched with greed. "But he locked the door, man," another voice mumbled. "There are 4 of us." Chad snapped. "He's one guy. We just kick the door in, take what we need. It's about survival. He's hoarding. It's not fair." The sheer, beautiful hypocrisy of it made me laugh out loud. The man who defined his entire existence by having more than everyone else was now crying, "It's not fair," because the tables had turned. The laughter died in my throat, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. A heavy, rhythmic scraping sound started up. It wasn't knocking, it was the sound of a crowbar trying to find purchase in the door frame. They were actually doing it. The idiots were actually trying to break down my door. I picked up one of my newly crafted knives. The weight of it was perfect in my hand. My cooldown for protocol rewriter was at 0. A predator's smile touched my lips again. My apartment wasn't a pantry. It was a Venus flytrap. And the flies were getting ready to buzz right in. The scraping stopped. From the other side of my door, I heard a frustrated grunt, followed by Chad's whining, poison-laced voice. "It's no use, the damn thing's solid steel." A different voice, rougher, muttered, "What now?" "We wait," Chad hissed. "He has to come out sometime. Nobody's got enough food and water to last forever." I almost laughed out loud. "Son, my pantry operates on principles of quantum physics that would make your tiny crypto-addled brain dribble out of your ears." Behind my back, which was still leaning against the now-scratched door, my newly created water purifier hummed a quiet, happy tune, steadily turning questionable heater tank sludge into water purer than anything that ever came out of the city's taps. But they were right about one thing. It was time to leave. This building, this entire city block, was a cage. A cage full of starving, increasingly stupid rats who were starting to get brave. My little show with the bread and water had been satisfying, a perfect 10 out of 10 on the petty revenge scale, but it had also painted a giant, glowing target on my back. Time for the upgrade. For the next 4 days, I became a ghost in my own apartment. I used the crafter to break down my remaining furniture, the bed frame, the metal desk, the TV stand, into raw ingots of wood, plastic, and low-grade steel. I reinforced my hiking gear, crafted a dozen more balanced throwing knives, and cobbled together a solar-powered charging bank that was ugly as sin but a borderline miracle in this new world. On the seventh night, it happened. The city's last gasping breath finally gave out. One by one, the distant streetlights, the emergency glow from the hospital, the final flickering office windows, they all went dark. The power grid was officially dead. The change was profound. Absolute, suffocating darkness clamped down on the world, a deep, primal black that felt heavier than a blanket. The only light came from the moon, and it was a cold, cruel light that made the shambling silhouettes of the wanderers outside look even more menacing. That was my signal. I didn't use the elevator. I used the maintenance rope I'd crafted from stripped electrical wiring and the leather from my useless designer belts. I rappelled from my balcony down to the parking garage, as silent as a spider. My truck was waiting, a beat-up Ford F-150 I'd bought cheap and spent the last year secretly modifying. Steel plates welded over the windows, a reinforced ramming grille on the front, and off-road tires that looked like they could chew up asphalt. It was my secret project, my what-if vehicle. Now, it was my chariot. Loading didn't take long when my backpack could hold infinity. The real challenge was the route. Radio chatter, what little remained, was a cacophony of panicked voices babbling about military safe zones at the university stadium or the downtown convention center. It was a lie. A beta tester like me knew those places weren't safe zones, they were bait. They were gathering points designed to concentrate the sheep for a bigger, nastier slaughter to come. My route was different. I had a map in my head burned there by a year of digital torment and exploration. It was a web of forgotten service roads, old industrial access lanes, and maintenance tunnels. I started the engine, its low rumble a cannon shot in the dead silence, and pulled out of the garage. I didn't even look back at the apartment building. As far as I was concerned, Vanessa, Chad, and the rest of them were already ghosts. The drive was eerie. The wind had picked up, a constant, mournful howl that carried the reek of rot and a fine, gritty ash that coated my windshield. I had to use the wipers every few minutes. My first stop wasn't a grocery store or a pharmacy. It was a massive, fenced-off power substation on the industrial outskirts of town. A place no one in their right mind would think had any value. They were wrong. I parked the truck, slipped through a cut in the chain-link fence, and walked among the giant, humming transformers, now silent and dead. I placed my hand on the first one. Scan material, industrial power transformer. Analysis complete. Contains 1.2 tons high-purity copper wiring, 3 tons graded silicon steel core, assorted ceramic insulators. A grin split my face. This wasn't just scrap metal. This was the lifeblood of advanced crafting. I held up my hand, focusing my will on the quantum space module of my backpack. There was no dramatic light show, just a faint, internal thump. The massive copper coils inside the transformer vanished. The whole structure sagged slightly, now just a hollow metal box. I moved to the next one, and the next, a one-man wrecking crew, hoovering up tons of premium, irreplaceable materials without making a sound. By the time I left, the entire substation was nothing but a collection of empty steel husks. My backpack didn't even feel heavier. Back on the road, I saw a flicker of movement up ahead. A small cluster of high-end vehicles, a brand-new Cadillac Escalade, a Porsche, a Mercedes, were stopped awkwardly in the middle of the road, surrounded. Not by a horde, just maybe 10 or 15 wanderers, drawn by the panic. Pathetic. And then I saw the man frantically waving from behind the bulletproof glass of the Escalade. Oh, this was perfect. It was Mr. Henderson, my boss, the one who had laid me off during a corporate restructuring 2 years ago, right after I'd put in a year of 80-hour weeks to launch his pet project. He'd given me the news with a smug, insincere smile, talking about trimming the fat, while wearing a watch that cost more than my car. He recognized my truck. His eyes went wide with frantic hope. The window of the Escalade lowered a few inches, and his voice, high and panicked, cut through the wind. Ren, it's you. Thank God. Help us. Get these things away from us. I'll pay you anything you want. I slowed the truck, rolling to a stop about 50 feet away, giving the wanderers a wide berth. I could see his family in the car behind him, his perfectly manicured wife and his 2 spoiled sons, their faces pale with terror. I leaned over and rolled down my passenger side window. Henderson's face lit up, a grotesque mask of relief. Yes, yes, just drive through them, clear a path. My Amex has no limit, Ren. No limit. I looked at him. I looked at the slow, shambling monsters clawing at his pristine paint job. I looked at his desperate, arrogant face, a face that had never known a single day of real hardship. Then I gave him a calm, friendly smile. Sorry, Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice carrying easily in the quiet apocalypse. My terminal's down, can't process cards at the moment. The confusion on his face was a thing of beauty. It lasted for about 2 seconds before it curdled into horrified understanding. Wait, Ren, you bastard, you can't just. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I put the truck in gear and hit the gas. The V8 roared, and I sped past them, the windows of their luxury prison reflecting my taillights. In my rearview mirror, I saw the wanderers, agitated by the noise of my engine, swarm the Escalade with renewed vigor. The sound of his scream, high-pitched and full of disbelief, was the best severance package I could have ever asked for. The further I got from the city center, the more the mask of civilization peeled away. I saw a man get stabbed over a can of beans. I saw a family get dragged from their car by a roving gang. I saw the strong preying on the weak, the desperate turning on each other. It was ugly, and it was predictable, and every scene of horror only hardened my resolve. In this world, there was no government, no police, no society. There was only your own strength, and the walls you built to protect it. Which brought me to my destination. A sprawling, derelict industrial park, miles from anywhere. It was a wasteland of rust and broken concrete, but I wasn't here for the scenery. I was here for what was underneath. I drove my truck right through the flimsy front gate of a defunct chemical processing plant and parked it inside the cavernous main warehouse, hidden from the sky. In the center of the concrete floor was my prize. A set of massive, 6-inch thick steel blast doors, flush with the ground, covered in decades of dust. The entrance to a decommissioned Cold War military command bunker. A place so forgotten it didn't appear on any modern maps. My safe house. The lock was a formidable-looking wheel mechanism, rusted solid. It would take a cutting torch and a week to get through. I placed my hand on the cold steel. Protocol. Corrode, I whispered. A section of the locking mechanism shimmered with a sickly green light. The thick steel bolts and pins turned to rust, then to dust, crumbling away in seconds. The whole mechanism went slack. My protocol rewriter ability had a 5-minute cooldown, but it was worth it every single time. With a groan of tortured metal, I heaved one of the massive doors open just enough to slip through. The air that hit me was stale, dry, and clean. I descended a flight of concrete stairs into darkness, a powerful flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The space opened up into something vast. A concrete cathedral, easily the size of a football field, with a 20-foot-high ceiling, supported by thick pillars. It was empty, dusty, and absolutely perfect. This was the foundation, the beginning of my fortress. As I stood there in the silent, tomb-like expanse, a strange thing happened. A faint chime, one I'd only ever heard in the beta, echoed in my mind. A panel of light, a system-wide HUD, flickered into existence in front of me, visible only to me. Global alert. World boss event initiated. A city map materialized in the air, a glowing 3D wireframe. In the very center, right over the downtown area I had just fled, a massive, pulsating red skull icon flared to life. Target, the glutton, has emerged from the Metro Central subway collapse. Objective, terminate the world boss. Warning, target is highly aggressive and possesses regenerative abilities. My eyes narrowed. A world boss, already? The game masters weren't wasting any time. Most players right now were probably still fighting over toilet paper. But then, a new line of text appeared below the alert, and my breath caught in my throat. First kill reward. Fortress core key, unique item. A slow, predatory grin spread across my face. A key, not just any key. I knew from the beta lore what that was. It wasn't just an item, it was the seed for a mobile base. The key to absolute safety, absolute power. The difference between being a king in a castle and a god in a mobile, teleporting fortress. Out there, the rest of the world was about to get its first real taste of hell, fighting a monster they couldn't possibly comprehend. They would see it as a disaster, an extinction-level event. I saw it as the first piece of my kingdom, gift-wrapped and waiting for me to come and claim it. Well now, I murmured into the echoing silence of my new home. It would be rude not to accept. The air in the bunker was cold, silent, and tasted of ancient concrete dust and forgotten secrets. It was perfect. 10 days. It had been 10 days since the world officially got flushed down the toilet. Up above, I knew the last of the canned chili and stale crackers were being fought over with fists and knives. The new currency on the fledgling black market, whispered about on the dying radio waves, wasn't gold or cash. It was bullets, a single 9mm round for a can of lukewarm SpaghettiOs. Pathetic, and predictable. I, on the other hand, was having a pretty productive week. The main cavern of the bunker was now illuminated not by just my flashlight, but by a string of heavy-duty LED work lights I'd permanently borrowed. They were hooked up to a bank of deep-cycle marine batteries, which in turn were perpetually topped off by the solar panels I'd laid out on the factory roof above, camouflaged with dust and debris. It wasn't pretty, but it was light. Glorious, beautiful, power grid-independent light. The first order of business, even before the world boss problem, was security. A base is only a base if people can't just waltz in. The original 6-inch thick blast doors were immense, but the locking mechanism I'd corroded was now a pile of reddish-brown dust. Useless. So, I set to work. Using the crafter interface in my backpack and the tons of high-grade steel I'd vacuumed up from the power station, I began fabricating a new gate. Not just a gate, a monster. A multi-layered slab of interlocking alloy plates, designed with an internal sequence locking system that only I knew the code to. It was a slow process. The crafter hummed, consuming ingots of metal like a hungry god, and the progress bar in my vision crept forward at a snail's pace. It would take days of constant fabrication. In the meantime, I needed to address the other A word, agriculture. Food was the ultimate power in this new world, and while my backpack could hold an infinite supply of MREs, that was just static inventory. True power meant production. It meant a self-renewing, endless supply. I pulled a small, velvet-lined box from a dedicated pocket in my backpack. Inside, nestled on a cushion, was a single seed. It was the size of a marble, smooth and gray, with faint, pulsing green lines just under its surface. The world seed, breadfruit tree. I had scouted the entire bunker complex. Most of it was sterile concrete and steel, but in a far corner, I found it. A large ventilation shaft, covered by a rusty grate, led not to the surface, but to a small, natural cavern network that the original builders had simply walled off. The air filtering through was damp and smelled of deep earth and stone. I pried the grate off and shined my light inside. A space the size of a small living room, with a floor of rich, dark soil, kept perpetually moist by a slow-dripping natural seep. A hidden underground garden. It was better than I could have hoped for. With all the reverence of a high priest planting the seed of a new civilization. Which, let's be honest, I kind of was. I pressed the seed into the damp earth. I didn't have to wait long. There was no slow, natural sprouting. This was a system-level event. The ground trembled slightly. The soil where I'd planted the seed began to glow with that same soft green light. It bulged upwards, and a thick, pale shoot erupted, reaching for the cavern ceiling at a speed you could actually see. It wasn't like watching a time lapse, it was like watching a magic trick. Within an hour, it was a full-grown tree, about 10 feet tall. Its bark was smooth and the color of pale wood, but its branches and leaves were bizarre. They looked like they were made of, well, solidified dough. A dense, fibrous, flour-like substance. And then, the magic happened. All over the tree, small, fist-sized lumps began to swell on the branches. They puffed up like proofing dough, their surfaces turning a golden brown. And then, one by one, they ripened. A soft plop echoed in the cavern as the first one detached and fell onto the soft earth below. I walked over and picked it up. It was a perfectly formed, round loaf of bread. It was still warm, steam rising from its broken stem, and it smelled incredible. That intoxicating, comforting aroma of freshly baked bread that could make a starving man weep. I broke it in half. The crust was light and crisp, the inside soft, white, and fluffy. I took a bite. It was real, wholesome, nutritious, and unbelievably delicious. While the rest of the city was trading bullets for expired beans, I was standing in my private fortress, eating a loaf of bread that had literally just fallen off a tree. The sheer, unadulterated luxury of it all was almost overwhelming. This wasn't just survival, this was a goddamn 5-star resort package for the end of the world. Miles away, in the gutted remains of a police precinct, Officer Megan Riley split the last protein bar 4 ways. She handed the tiny, crumbly pieces to the 3 remaining members of her squad. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow with a mixture of fatigue and despair. They'd tried to maintain order. They really had, but order was a flimsy concept when everyone was a week away from starvation. The shelves of every Costco, every Walmart, every 7-Eleven were stripped bare, monuments to a forgotten age of plenty. All that was left were the ghosts of price tags and the occasional dark stain on the floor where someone had been less than willing to share. "We need to move," she said, her voice raspy. "The gangs are getting bolder. They're organized. We heard on the radio they hit the National Guard convoy." Her second in command, a big guy named Franks, just shook his head. "And go where, Megan? Every safe zone has turned into a slaughterhouse. We're on our own." Megan stared out a broken window at the silent, predatory city. He was right, but staying here was a death sentence. They were strong, they were trained, but they couldn't fight hunger. In the makeshift infirmary of a collapsed field hospital, Dr. Anya Sharma tied off the last suture on a nasty gash, using dental floss she'd sterilized with the last of her rubbing alcohol. The patient, a young girl who'd fallen from a fire escape, was unconscious from a cocktail of expired Tylenol and sheer exhaustion. Anya's hands were steady, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. Her medical supplies were gone. Not low, gone. She was down to scavenge bandages and a prayer. Every new patient was a new exercise in helpless frustration. She was a brilliant surgeon with the tools of a first aid kit from a dollar store. People were dying from infected cuts, from dehydration, from things that would have been a minor inconvenience 2 weeks ago. The world hadn't just lost its power grid, it had lost its immune system. See that? A guttural voice growled. That whole factory block, empty. Bet there's some good scrap in there. Maybe a stray survivor we can tax. Spike was the leader of his little pack of hyenas, mostly because he was the biggest and had the fewest scruples. There were 5 of them in total, armed with a motley collection of pipes, bats, and 1 rusty shotgun with 3 shells. They'd been doing well for themselves, preying on isolated families and smaller groups. Now, they'd stumbled upon my industrial park. "Looks dead, boss," another one, a weaselly guy named Rat, chirped. "Nobody's been here in years." "That's the point, idiot," Spike grunted, slapping Rat on the back of the head. "Nobody's picked it clean yet. Let's go. Fan out. Yell if you find anything good. Or anyone soft." They approached the main warehouse, the one my truck was parked in, their movements clumsy and loud. They were the apex predators of a broken world, and they were dumber than a bag of hammers. They didn't see the faint scuff marks from my off-road tires. They didn't notice the single, almost invisible tripwire I'd strung across the main entrance, made from high-tensile fishing line. I was sitting on a crate in the main bunker, reviewing the system alert for the glutton. The military's attempt to take it down had been a spectacular failure. The after-action reports I was intercepting on encrypted channels were a comedy of errors. They'd sent in tanks, and the creature had apparently used them like tin cans, peeling them open to get at the chewy centers. It had turned downtown into its personal lair, and no one dared go near it now. The fortress core key was just sitting there, waiting. But I wasn't an idiot. Rushing in was what those poor saps in the army did. I needed better gear, a solid fallback point, and a plan. The key wasn't going anywhere. That's when I heard it. A faint, tinny jingle from the stairwell. It was my early warning system. Nothing fancy. Just a few empty cans tied to the tripwire. Low tech, but effective. They were in the warehouse. Right above me, a slow, predatory grin spread across my face. I placed the half-eaten loaf of bread down on the crate next to me. I stood up, stretching my shoulders, and picked up the combat knife I'd crafted. A foot-long piece of sharpened, perfectly balanced alloy that could punch through a car door. The idiots upstairs were probably looking for scrap metal and canned beans. They had no idea they'd just stumbled upon the biggest treasure trove in the entire state. And its very, very territorial owner. "Well now," I murmured into the echoing silence of my home. "Looks like the food delivery service is here." The tinny jingle of the cans was music to my ears. It was the sound of opportunity, or more accurately, the sound of idiots stumbling into my web. They were loud, so clumsy you'd think they were trying to announce their presence to every walker in a 5-mile radius. I didn't even bother hiding my smile. This was better than a movie. I left my half-eaten loaf of god-tier bread on the crate, a silent promise to myself that I'd be back for it shortly. The combat knife felt like an extension of my hand, its alloy surface cool and deadly. I didn't run. I ascended the concrete stairs with the silent, deliberate pace of a landlord coming to collect overdue rent. Up in the main warehouse, I could hear them. 5 of them, just as the clumsy footsteps suggested. Nothing here but dust, Spike, a whiny voice complained. Total bust. Shut it, rat, a deeper voice growled. I peeked through a crack in the stairwell door. The one called Spike was a big slab of a man, built like a vending machine with a face to match. He was holding a rusty shotgun like it was a king's scepter. Pathetic. The others were just as unimpressive, armed with pipes and bats, their eyes darting around with the nervous energy of starving animals. They were fanning out, kicking over empty crates, their hopes visibly deflating with every new discovery of absolutely nothing. They were looking for scraps. They had no idea they were standing on top of a dragon's hoard. My hoard. Wait, one of them said, pointing. Look, a truck, and it looks new. All 5 pairs of eyes swiveled to my parked off-roader, half hidden behind a stack of steel pallets. A greedy light ignited in Spike's eyes. Well, maybe someone's already here, and if they got a ride like that. He racked the shotgun, the shuck sound echoing in the cavernous space. They got other stuff we want. Find him. That was my cue. I didn't bother with a grand entrance. I simply pushed the heavy steel door open and stepped out. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, knife held in a relaxed, low grip, watching them. They all froze, turning towards me. Rat, the weaselly one, actually jumped. Spike puffed out his chest, trying to look intimidating. It was adorable. Who the hell are you? He demanded, leveling the shotgun at my chest. I let the silence hang for a beat. Let them soak in the absurdity of their situation. 5 scroungers with scrap metal versus me. Leave the truck, I said, my voice calm and flat. And everything you've scavenged today. I'll let you walk out of here with your lives. A couple of them glanced at each other, a flicker of common sense in their eyes. But Spike was the leader, and leaders in this new world were often the ones with the most ego and the least brains. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Listen to this guy. You hear that, boys? He'll let us live. He took a step forward. Here's how this is gonna go, pal. You're gonna give us the keys to that truck, and everything else you got stashed away. And if you're lucky, we'll leave you with your pants. I sighed, a genuine, theatrical sigh of disappointment. I really did try to be reasonable. Then I moved. Before Spike could even process my words, I activated my skill. My eyes focused on the shotgun in his hands. A blue, wireframe box appeared in my vision, overlaying the weapon. Backquote, item. Mossberg 500 pump-action shotgun, rusty, backquote. Backquote, status. Loaded, safety off, backquote. Backquote, current protocol. Firing mechanism, operational, backquote. With a thought, I issued a command. Backquote rewrite protocol. Firing mechanism to jammed, permanent, backquote. Spike's finger squeezed the trigger. There was a dull, metallic clunk. Nothing else. He stared at the shotgun in confusion, a dumb look on his face. That was all the time I needed. I surged forward, a blur of motion. The first goon swung his pipe. I sidestepped, the pipe whistling past my ear, and drove the butt of my knife into his temple. He went down without a sound. Rat shrieked and tried to run. I kicked the back of his knee, and he crumpled with a cry of pain. 2 down. The other 2 charged together, a clumsy pincer movement. I ducked under a wild bat swing, my knife flashing out in a precise arc, opening a deep gash on the man's arm. He screamed, dropping the bat. His friend hesitated for a fatal second. I spun, my legs sweeping out and knocking his feet from under him. He hit the concrete with a sickening crack. It took less than 5 seconds. 4 men were on the ground, groaning or unconscious. Only Spike was left standing, fumbling with his now useless shotgun, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning terror. What are you? He stammered, backing away. I'm the guy who lives here, I said, walking towards him slowly. And I don't like visitors. I didn't kill them. Death was too quick. I broke their arms and their legs. Methodically, efficiently, I left them in a heap by the entrance, a screaming, moaning warning to anyone else who might get curious about my industrial park. Their loot, a few cans of expired dog food, A half-empty bottle of vodka, and a box of damp matches, was now mine. A pittance, but it was the principle of the thing. Back in the bunker, the progress bar for the new blast door was at 98%. Excellent. I finished my bread and took inventory. Food, water, power, and security were all handled. But there was a glaring hole in my little kingdom. Medical. I was healthy now, but the new world was full of nasty surprises. A bad cut, an infection, a bite from some new biofreak. Without proper medical care, it was a death sentence. I needed a doctor. Not just any doctor. I needed the best. My mind went to the file I had on Dr. Anya Sharma. A surgical prodigy who became head of her department at 28. Genius-level IQ, steady hands, and nerves of steel. In my beta test playthroughs, she was a high-value NPC, capable of crafting advanced medical supplies that could turn the tide of a battle. And I knew exactly where she was. Pinned down in the ruins of the city's central hospital. A place most survivors now considered a death trap. Time for a little recruitment drive. The drive into the city was an education in decay. It was day 15, and the world was already starting to get funky. The air had a weird, chemical tang to it, low-level toxicity from ruptured chemical plants and the sheer volume of rot. I had a military-grade gas mask on, but I saw plenty of poor souls wandering aimlessly, faces pale, looking dizzy and sick. Then I saw the new flavor of zombie. The system had called them spore walkers. One was shambling down the middle of the street. It looked like a regular walker, but its body was covered in pustules of pulsing, greenish-black fungus. As I drove past, I targeted it with a silenced pistol I'd crafted. The bullet hit it square in the head. Instead of just dropping, the thing's torso exploded in a cloud of thick, green-black spores. A nearby survivor, a man scrounging in a dumpster, caught a face full of the cloud. He started coughing, then screaming as his own skin began to blister and bubble. Nasty. I made a mental note. Aim for the legs, then finish from a distance. The hospital was a monument to desperation. The entrance was barricaded with gurneys and overturned ambulances. The walls were stained with blood and things I didn't want to identify. The smell of antiseptic, death, and fear was overpowering. Most people would turn and run. I grinned. This was a target-rich environment. I slipped in through a broken side window, my movements silent. The place was a maze of despair. But I had a map. My analysis module wasn't just for items, it could scan structures. I sent out a pulse. Scanning. Structural anomalies detected. A wireframe of the floor plan appeared in my vision. Most of it was standard hospital layout. But one wall in the main administrative wing was flashing. Hollow space detected behind wall. High-density pharmaceutical signature, a secret government stash, the kind of thing they build for pandemics and then forget about. Not even the hospital staff would know it's there, bingo. First, the doctor, then, the jackpot. I followed the signs towards the surgical wing. The sounds of a heated argument grew louder. I flattened myself against a wall, peering around the corner. It was exactly as the blueprint had predicted. Dr. Anya Sharma, looking exhausted but defiant, was backed into an operating theater. She was holding a scalpel, her knuckles white. Facing her were three men. One was a portly, balding man in a soiled, expensive suit. I recognized him from the hospital's staff photos, Director Thorne, a notorious ass-kisser and paper pusher. The other two were his thugs, probably security guards he'd bribed with the promise of food. Just give it to us, Anya. Thorne pleaded, his voice a slimy mix of desperation and authority. I saw you take it from the emergency vault. That case. It's the cure, isn't it? You can't hoard it for yourself. That's unethical. Anya's voice was cold. You have no idea what this is, Director. It's not a cure. It's dangerous. Lies, one of the thugs snarled, brandishing a metal IV stand like a club. The Director is in charge here. You'll give it to him, or we'll take it. They started to advance on her. She was trapped, a brilliant surgeon, cornered by idiots who were about to get her killed over their own greed. Showtime. I stepped out from behind the corner, my footsteps echoing in the tense silence. I'd listen to the lady if I were you, I said conversationally. All four of them whipped around. Thorne's face went from greedy to furious. And who the hell are you? This is a restricted area. I ignored him, my eyes locking onto the thug with the scalpel. It was a standard issue surgical tool. My vision highlighted it. Item. Number 10 scalpel. Sterile. Status. mundane, current protocol, temperature, ambient, rewrite protocol, temperature to 900 degrees Celsius, 10 seconds, The thug holding Anya at bay suddenly screamed, a high-pitched, girlish shriek. The scalpel in his hand was glowing a bright, cherry red. Smoke poured from his palm as his flesh sizzled. He dropped the weapon with a clatter and staggered back, clutching his burned hand and howling. The chaos was the only opening I needed. I moved past Thorn like he was a statue. The thug with the IV stand swung it at my head. I caught it, wrenched it from his grasp, and slammed the steel base into his jaw with a sickening crunch. He collapsed in a heap. The third guy, the one who'd just been burned, was still whimpering. A single, precise chop to the back of his neck sent him slumping to the floor. Silence returned, broken only by Thorn's panicked breathing and the distant moans of the dying. Anya stared at me, her eyes wide with shock, but also a flicker of something else. Recognition? No. Assessment. I walked over to Thorn, who was now trembling, his face the color of spoiled milk. I plucked the small, metallic case from the table beside him. The supposed cure. You want to know what this is? I asked, holding it up. I turned to Anya, giving her a slight nod. Then, I activated my analysis module on the case, making sure the UI projection was visible in the dim light in front of her, like a holographic blueprint. Item. T03 inhibitor, experimental, effect. When injected into subject in early-stage Z-virus infection, less than 1 hour, initiate cellular battle, outcome probability, 30% chance of halting transformation, 69% chance of massive systemic shock and immediate death, 1% chance of uncontrolled, violent mutation, I read the stats out loud, my voice devoid of emotion. A 30% chance to live, a 69% chance to die instantly, and a 1% chance to turn into something much, much worse than a walker. So, tell me, Director, I said, turning back to the terrified man. Does that sound like a cure you want to be distributing? Thorn's jaw worked, but no sound came out. His greedy fantasy had just imploded, replaced by a horrifying reality. He had tried to kill a woman for a bottle of poison. You're a leader, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. Leaders should be willing to take risks for their people, right? I popped the case open. Inside was a single, sleek auto-injector. Before he could scream, I grabbed the front of his suit, yanked him close, and jammed the injector into the side of his fleshy neck. There was a sharp hiss. I let him go and stepped back. Let's see if you're lucky. He wasn't. His eyes bulged. His body went rigid, then began to convulse violently. A guttural, gurgling sound escaped his throat as foam frothed at his lips. The seizure lasted for 10 seconds, then he went limp, dropping to the tiled floor like a sack of garbage. The 69% had hit. I looked at Anya. She hadn't flinched. She was looking at Thorn's body, then at me, her expression a complex mixture of shock, fear, and a strange, chilling understanding. The world she knew, the one with ethics committees and the Hippocratic Oath, was gone. She was a pragmatist. She understood what she had just witnessed. It wasn't murder. It was sanitation. Just then, a soft ding sounded in my head. World announcement. The leaderboard has been activated. Anonymous user, P, has achieved national treasure. Reason, secured a national-level emergency pharmaceutical stockpile. I couldn't help but chuckle. Looks like I was on the board. The hospital is compromised. The rest of the staff are either dead or monsters like him, I said to Anya, gesturing to the corpse. You can't stay here. I have a place. It's safe. There's food, clean water, power. I need a doctor. She didn't hesitate. She just gave a sharp, single nod. Okay. After she pointed me to Thorn's office, I spent the next hour using a pry bar on the wall he'd unknowingly worked in front of for years. Behind it was a treasure trove. Crates upon crates of military-grade antibiotics, trauma kits, surgical tools, morphine, blood plasma. Everything a post-apocalyptic doctor could ever dream of. I vacuumed it all into my quantum backpack. As we walked out of the hospital, Anya was quiet. She watched me, this complete stranger who had appeared from the shadows, dispatched her tormentors with terrifying efficiency, and then revealed a hidden pharmacy like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. As we got into my truck and drove away from the nightmare, she looked at my back. She was smart enough to know that in this new world, following the sheep meant ending up in a slaughterhouse. Sticking with the wolf was the only real path to survival. Back at the bunker, the great alloy gate had finished fabricating. It sealed the entrance with a heavy, satisfying thud, shutting out the dying world. I led her down into the main cavern, the one with the soft light and the warm, clean air. "This is incredible," she whispered, looking around at the organized supplies, the string of lights, the sheer order in the midst of chaos. "This is just the lobby," I said. "There's one more thing you should see." I led her to the hidden grotto, to the chamber with the rich, damp earth. The breadfruit tree stood there, its doughy leaves glowing faintly. But that wasn't what I wanted to show her. In a corner of the cavern, a small spring bubbled up from the rocks. The water was crystal clear, flowing over smooth stones and pooling into a small basin before disappearing back into the earth. It wasn't just water, it radiated a faint, calming energy, and the air around it felt purer, cleaner. Anya knelt by its edge, her surgeon's eyes wide with a scientist's disbelief. "What is this?" World seed, stream of purification, has matured, effect, produces mineral water with mild healing and detoxification properties, I smiled. "That," I said, "is our new infirmary's water supply. Welcome home, doctor." Day 20, the end of the world was starting to get a routine. A damn comfortable one, at that. Dr. Anya Sharma moved through the newly designated med bay with the focused expression of a squirrel who'd just discovered the world's biggest nut hoard. And in a way, she had. Crates of military-grade antibiotics were stacked against one wall, a gleaming stainless steel surgical table sat in the center of the room, and enough plasma, morphine, and trauma kits to sustain a small army were organized neatly on shelves I'd fabricated that morning. Every so often, she'd pause, pick up a sterile suture kit or a bottle of broad-spectrum antivirals, and just stare at it, a look of pure, unadulterated disbelief on her face. "I've worked in a state-of-the-art hospital my entire career," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "And I've never seen a private stockpile this comprehensive. It's beyond a national reserve. It's insane." I was leaning against the doorway, sipping on a cup of wonderfully warm, slightly sweet water from our new little stream of purification. "Glad you approve, Doc. Get it organized however you like. You're the boss in here." She gave me a look, the kind a sane person gives a borderline lunatic who somehow keeps pulling miracles out of his ass. It was a look I was getting used to, and a look I was starting to enjoy. Just then, the lights in the bunker flickered once, and a soft chime echoed in my head, a private notification just for me. System alert. Phase 2 environmental hazard initiated, event, flash freeze. Ambient external temperature dropping to -20°C within the next 3 hours. Duration, 48 hours, new organism detected. Sub-zero predator, frost wolf, I felt a grin spread across my face. Oh, this was going to be fun. "What was that flicker?" Anya asked, her head snapping up. "The world's about to get a whole lot cooler," I said, pushing off the wall. "Time for a little home improvement." The air outside the main gate, piped in through a filtered vent, was already dropping in temperature. A strange, sharp smell, like ozone and ice, filled the industrial park. Snow began to fall, but this wasn't the fluffy, poetic stuff you see in Christmas movies. These were tiny, hard pellets of ice that pinged off the metal roof of the warehouse above. The flash freeze snow didn't just cover things, it aggressively sucked the heat out of them. Exposed metal would become brittle enough to snap. Exposed skin would get frostbite in minutes. It was a death sentence for the unprepared. First things first, I strode over to my workbench, a mess of tools and parts I'd scavenged, and pulled up the Universal Fabricator interface. "What are you doing?" Anya asked, following me with a curious glint in her eyes. "Building a 5-star hotel," I quipped, scrolling through my blueprints. "We have power, but it's localized. I'm building a central heating system. Don't want your fancy medicines freezing, do we?" I selected the blueprint, central heating unit, high efficiency, the required materials list popped up. Copper piping, various electronic components, insulated ductwork, and the main ingredient. One miniature fusion core, stable, I'd found that little beauty in the wreckage of a university research lab, just sitting there in its lead-lined case. The fools had probably evacuated in such a panic they forgot their tabletop sun. Their loss. As the fabricator hummed to life, turning raw materials into perfectly crafted components with a low, satisfying whir, Anya just shook her head. You're not just a survivor, are you? You're something else. I'm a guy who hates being cold, I said simply. While the system was being built, I decided to go hunting. The system had mentioned frost wolves, and new monster meat was always a welcome addition to the menu. I pulled on a set of thermal gear I'd crafted, gear that made me look like an Arctic explorer from a sci-fi movie, and grabbed my silenced rifle. You're going out in that? Anya's voice was sharp with alarm. Be back in an hour, I said, giving her a wink. Put a big pot of water on to boil. The world outside the bunker doors was a nightmare of white. The wind howled and the ice pellets stung any tiny patch of exposed skin. But my gear held, keeping me in a comfortable bubble of warmth. It didn't take long to find them. 3 of them. They looked like timber wolves, but their fur was stark white, their eyes glowed with a faint blue light, and when they breathed, a visible puff of freezing mist escaped their jaws. They spotted me and fanned out, their movements impossibly fast and silent in the snow. One of them lunged. I didn't even aim. My combat instincts, honed by a year of beta testing, took over. I sidestepped, brought the rifle up, and put a single round through its glowing blue eye. It dropped without a sound. The other 2 hesitated, a fatal mistake. 2 more soft PHUTS from my rifle, and the pack was down. I used my analysis module. Frost wolf meat. High in protein. Consuming provides temporary mild resistance to cold. Bonus. I quickly butchered the best cuts and stowed them in my quantum backpack. Dinner was served. By the time I returned, the central heating unit was at 99%. Anya had followed my instructions, and a huge stockpot of purified water was steaming away on a portable induction stove. The air in the bunker was already getting toasty as I connected the final piece of ductwork. A warm, gentle breeze began to flow from vents I'd installed in the walls. We had officially achieved peak coziness. That's when the banging started. It wasn't a panic knock. It was a heavy, rhythmic thump 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 of something large hitting the main gate. I smirked and walked over to a monitor bank I'd set up, flicking a switch. A dozen camera feeds flickered to life, showing the blizzard-swept exterior from every angle. And there they were, a whole crowd of them, maybe 30 men, huddled together against the wind, their faces blue with cold. They were dressed in scavenged rags, armed with lead pipes, rusty axes, and one guy was swinging a pathetic-looking sledgehammer against my multi-ton alloy gate. He wasn't even denting the paint. At the front was a big, bald-headed brute, his face contorted in a mask of furious desperation. He was screaming something, but the wind and the thick steel of the door swallowed his words. They looked less like a menacing gang of raiders and more like a bunch of angry, frozen garden gnomes. Oh, look, visitors, I announced casually. Anya came to stand beside me, her eyes widening at the scene on the monitor. My God, they'll freeze to death out there. Her voice held a note of pity, the last vestiges of her old-world morality. They had hours to find proper shelter, I said, shrugging. They chose to spend that time gathering up their little lynch mob to come and knock on my door. Bad time management, if you ask me. I turned away from the screen. Anyway, the entertainment has arrived. Let's get that hot pot started. 10 minutes later, the scene was utterly, beautifully absurd. Outside, in the howling, sub-zero nightmare, 30 desperate men were wasting their last remaining body heat trying to break down an unbreakable door. They were screaming, cursing, fighting amongst themselves. The guy with the sledgehammer had already slipped on the ice twice. Inside, Anya and I were sitting at a comfortable table in the middle of our warm, brightly lit cavern. The rich, savory smell of bubbling broth filled the air. I used a pair of chopsticks to dip a thin slice of frost wolf meat into the pot. It cooked in seconds. I dipped it into a sesame chili sauce I had a literal crate of, and popped it into my mouth. Delicious. You have to try this, I told Anya, gesturing to the plate of freshly sliced meat. It's got a nice, clean flavor. Almost like venison. She looked from the steaming hot pot to the monitor, where the bald-headed leader was now kicking the gate in a fit of impotent rage. A slow smile spread across her face. The pity was gone, replaced by a chillingly pragmatic understanding. She picked up her own chopsticks. The one on the left, I commented, pointing at the screen with my chopstick. He's holding his axe all wrong. All arm, no hip rotation. He's gonna throw his shoulder out. Anya let out a small, surprised laugh. You're terrible. I'm efficient, I corrected. And hungry. We ate as we watched them slowly succumb to the inevitable. Their movements became sluggish. The sledgehammer fell from numb fingers. The shouting died down, replaced by huddled shivering. A few of them tried to start a fire with some trash, but the wind was too fierce. It was like watching a nature documentary. A very, very satisfying nature documentary. After about an hour, most of them had either collapsed in the snow or staggered away into the whiteout, towards a certain death. The bald-headed leader was one of the last ones standing. He stared at the gate, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of hollow, soul-crushed despair. He knew he'd led his men to their graves over a stupid, greedy gamble. He finally slumped to his knees, a statue of failure, before collapsing face first into a snowdrift. The show was over. Anya was quiet for a moment, sipping her broth. They never had a chance, did they? Nope, I said, cheerfully grabbing more mushrooms for the pot. Not a single one. She looked at me, then around the warm, secure bunker. At the food, the clean water, the medicine. At the monster of a man who provided it all. I understand now, she said softly. This isn't just about surviving. It's about winning. I'll prepare a full inventory of the medical supplies and set up a proper triage protocol. For us. I nodded. Good. She was a keeper. A smart, logical, and now thoroughly disillusioned member of the New World. A small part of my mind briefly wondered about the other survivors out there. People like that tough as nails cop, Megan Riley, and her squad. I wondered if their precinct station had decent insulation. Probably not. They were likely huddled around a barrel fire, burning desks and chairs, counting their bullets. A grim thought, but one I pushed aside for now. One problem at a time. The next morning, the storm had broken. The world outside was covered in a thick, pristine blanket of white, sparkling under a pale sun. It was almost beautiful, if you ignored the frozen human-shaped lumps scattered around my front door. Time to take out the trash. And collect the loot. I geared up and went outside, the satisfying hiss clunk of the alloy gate echoing behind me. Most of the raiders had nothing of value. A broken lighter here, a rusty can opener there. Pathetic. But then I came to the body of their leader, Cutter. I knelt down, my analysis module automatically scanning him. Lootable items. Worn leather jacket, rusty hand axe, empty pistol holster. The usual junk, but then, a new line item popped up, flashing in my vision. Data item detected. Encrypted fob. Fob contains protected data file. Central Precinct Armory Manifest and Access Map. I plucked the small, metallic fob from his frozen pocket. A slow, predatory smile spread across my face. The Central Precinct, the last known location of Officer Megan Riley and her team. A fortress, but one that was likely running on fumes. And according to this, it held a treasure trove of guns and ammo. It seemed my next recruitment drive was about to begin. Day 25, the great flash freeze was over, and it left the world a miserable, slushy mess. The pristine blanket of white snow had turned into a treacherous landscape of gray mush and slick, black ice. The air no longer bit with the fury of a predator. Now it just felt like a soggy, persistent chill that seeped into your bones if you weren't careful. It was the kind of weather that made you want to stay inside, drink something hot, and watch the world rot from the comfort of a reinforced armchair. Which is exactly what I would be doing, if I didn't have a new toy to play with. The encrypted fob I'd plucked from that frozen idiot's pocket felt warm in my hand. Central Precinct Armory Manifest and Access Map. It was a golden ticket. A key to a kingdom of boomsticks and a chance to recruit some real talent. Anya was in the med bay, humming a tune as she meticulously organized her spoils of war. She didn't even look up when I started gearing up. The frantic, questioning woman I'd found was gone, replaced by a calm, efficient professional who had accepted the new world order. My world order. Going out again? She asked, her back still to me. Recruitment drive, I said, strapping on my tactical vest over the thermal gear. The cold was still a factor. And a little. Acid acquisition. Need backup? I chuckled, chambering a round into my rifle. Honey, I am the backup. She finally turned, a small smile on her lips. Don't get killed. My medical inventory looks too pretty to be used on you. I'll try to contain my excitement, I quipped, and stepped out into the mess. The drive to the Central Precinct was slow going. The roads were a nightmare, littered with abandoned cars and the occasional, newly thought obstacle. Some of the wanderers who'd been turned into frozen statues by the blizzard were coming back online, but they were different. Slow. Their skin was discolored with patches of frostbite, and when they shambled towards my armored truck, they left a thin sheen of ice on the pavement behind them. A swipe from one of their claws against my window left a spiderweb of frost. The system pinged in my head. Mutated organism detected. Frostbitten wanderer. Ability. Frost touch. Physical attacks have a chance to apply a slow debuff to the target. Cute. The game was adding status effects. I didn't even bother wasting bullets, just plowed right through them. The thumps were deeply satisfying. It took nearly an hour to reach the outskirts of the central precinct. It was a brutalist-style fortress of concrete and reinforced glass, a perfect defensive position. And it was under siege. I parked a few blocks away and used a pair of high-powered binoculars I'd salvaged to get a look. It was more organized than I expected. A group of about 50 men, clad in a mismatched assortment of scavenged police gear and civilian clothing, had formed a perimeter. They weren't just a mob, they had discipline. They moved in squads, used hand signals, and had set up a heavy machine gun on a tripod, laying down suppressing fire on the upper windows of the building. At their center, barking orders, was a man who screamed, "Ex-cop." He had the potbelly, the military-style haircut, and the arrogant sneer of a man who'd spent 20 years bullying people with a badge and was thrilled the world now let him do it without paperwork. My analysis module confirmed it. Name, Tom Hansen. Title, former police chief, disgraced. Threat level, annoying. Perfect, a petty tyrant with a god complex. My favorite kind. They were in the middle of a coordinated push. A 10-man team carrying makeshift tower shields made of sheet metal and stop signs advanced under the cover of the machine gun, heading for the front entrance. From the sporadic pistol fire coming from the precinct, I could tell the defenders were low on ammo and pinned down. This was the final act. Hansen was about to get everything he wanted. Too bad for him, the director just showed up to rewrite the ending. I felt that familiar, delicious thrill bubble up inside me. The feeling of a hacker about to crash the entire server. I didn't move from my spot. Didn't even raise my rifle. I just focused, my mind reaching out, parsing the code of the world around them. The shield wall was about 30 feet from the precinct doors. The men behind them were confident, their steps heavy and sure. Time for a little physics change. Protocol override. Target area. 10 by 10 meter patch of concrete. Execute command. Set attribute. Friction coefficient. To, value. 0.05. It happened instantly. One moment, the 10-man assault team was a charging phalanx of grim-faced thugs. The next, they were a live-action cartoon. The lead man's feet shot out from under him as the concrete beneath his boots suddenly became more slippery than a greased-up ice rink. He went down hard, his helmet clattering on the ground. The man behind him tripped over him, flailing his arms like a drunken flamingo before face-planting. It caused a chain reaction, a beautiful, chaotic pile-up of bodies and clanging metal shields. It looked like a human bowling alley, and I just rolled a perfect strike. Shouts of confusion and anger erupted from Hansen's line. The men in the pile-up were struggling to get up, their limbs sliding uselessly beneath them. Hansen, his face turning a delightful shade of purple, started screaming at them. "What the hell are you doing? Get up, you useless morons!" He gestured furiously at the machine gunner. "More cover fire. Pin them down." The gunner obliged, squeezing the trigger of the big M249. The gun bucked once, spat out a single bullet, and then, nothing. A pathetic click. I could practically see the confusion on the gunner's face. He pulled the charging handle, trying to clear the jam. It wouldn't budge. Oh, that wasn't a random malfunction. That was me. Protocol override. Target object. M249 saw firing mechanism. Execute command. Set attribute. State, to, value. Fused, solid, I'd essentially micro-welded his firing pin in place. He could pull that handle until his arm fell off. That gun was now just a very heavy, very expensive club. Hansen's face went from purple to a shade of apoplectic crimson I hadn't known was possible. This was not going according to his brilliant plan. He drew his own sidearm and started firing at the precinct himself, a show of impotent rage. Charge! Forget the shields. Just charge. A few of his more loyal and dumber followers obeyed. They started running forward, only to hit the invisible patch of ice like concrete and go down in a comedic tumble of flailing limbs. The assault had degenerated into a complete farce. Now, for the finale. I focused on the shields the men in the pile-up were still desperately clinging to for cover. Backquote protocol override. Target objects. All makeshift shields in zone. Backquote. Backquote execute command. Set attribute. Structural integrity. To. Value. Brittle. Glass. Backquote. The firing from the precinct, though sparse, hadn't stopped. A single pistol round, probably a 9mm, zinged out from a second-story window and struck the nearest shield. Instead of a dull thunk and a dent, there was a loud crack sound, like a pane of cheap glass shattering. The entire stop sign shield exploded into a dozen sharp-edged pieces, showering the man behind it. He screamed, more in shock than pain. That was all the defenders needed. Seeing the shields were now useless, they concentrated their remaining fire. Each bullet impact resulted in another shield shattering dramatically. Panic, pure and undiluted, finally broke Hansen's ranks. His men weren't soldiers, they were bullies. And bullies fold the second they're not the ones with all the power. They dropped what was left of their cover and scrambled away, their retreat made even more pathetic by the fact that several of them kept slipping and falling on my little frictionless playground. It was time for my entrance. I slung my rifle over my shoulder and began to walk, not run, toward the scene. My boots crunched on the gravel, a steady, unhurried rhythm. The battle fell silent as everyone, Hansen's remaining men and the defenders in the windows, stopped to stare at the lone figure casually strolling into the kill zone. Hansen saw me coming. He pointed his revolver at me, his hand trembling slightly. "Who the hell are you?" "Stop right there." I just kept walking, a small smile on my face. When I was about 20 feet away, I raised a hand. Backquote protocol override. Target object. Colt Python revolver. Backquote. Backquote execute command. Set attribute. Action. To. Value. Seize. Cylinder. Backquote. He pulled the trigger. Click. He pulled it again. Click. 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 The hammer fell on empty chambers because the cylinder was frozen solid, unable to rotate. His eyes widened in horrified disbelief. He looked at his gun, then back at me, as if I were a ghost. I didn't even break my stride. I walked right up to him, plucked the useless revolver from his numb fingers, and then, with practiced efficiency, slammed the butt of it against the side of his head. He went down like a sack of rancid potatoes. Unconscious. Silence. The entire street was dead quiet, save for the whistling wind and the groans of the injured. I turned to look up at the precinct building. A woman with a severe ponytail, her face smeared with grime and exhaustion, was staring down at me from a broken window, a pistol held in a white-knuckled grip. Officer Megan Riley. She looked even tougher in person. "The situation is under control," I called out, my voice echoing in the sudden calm. "You might want to come open the door." 10 minutes later, I was standing in the main lobby, dragging an unconscious Tom Hansen behind me by his collar. The place smelled of cordite, fear, and stale coffee. Megan Riley and her 3 surviving officers, 2 men and a woman, all looking like they'd been through a meat grinder, stood before me, weapons still cautiously aimed. "He's all yours," I said, dropping Hansen on the floor with a thud. He groaned. Megan didn't lower her gun. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent despite her exhaustion, scanned me from head to toe. "What was that, out there? That wasn't normal. The world isn't normal anymore, Officer Riley," I said, leaning against a reception desk. "Normal gets you killed. I'm offering something better." I gestured around the battered lobby. "You ran a good defense. But you were minutes away from being overrun. You're out of ammo, out of food, and out of luck. Your order is gone." I straightened up, my tone shifting from casual to command. "I have a fortress. I have unlimited food and clean water. I have enough medicine to run a hospital. And I have the power to make guns jam and the ground turn to ice. I am the new order." I gave them the choice. "You can join me, follow my lead, and you'll have a purpose again, with the resources to actually achieve it. You'll fight, you'll win, and you'll live well. Or," I added with a shrug, "you can take what's left in your armory, and I'll walk away. Good luck surviving the next blizzard, or the next gang of idiots with a bigger gun." The 4 of them exchanged looks. They saw the truth in my words. They had fought for a world that no longer existed. Their bravery was pointless without overwhelming power to back it up. Megan Riley, a symbol of the old world's dying justice, holstered her pistol. She took a step forward, her movements stiff. Then, to the astonishment of her squad, she dropped to one knee. It wasn't a gesture of subservience, but one of a soldier recognizing a new, undeniable authority. "What are your orders, Commander?" A system notification, bright and glorious, flashed only for me. System alert. Faction, Central Precinct Remnant, has pledged allegiance. Milestone achieved. Conqueror of the Blue Fortress. Reward unlocked. Blueprint, Sentry Turret, Basic. World announcement. Player, Phantasm, has claimed the Central Precinct stronghold. The first bastion of the old world has fallen. A wide, predatory grin spread across my face. Oh, I could just imagine the panic and fury of the other players out there seeing that message. Later that day, after moving the entire contents of the police armory, crates of rifles, shotguns, pistols, and tens of thousands of rounds of ammo, back to my bunker, I was looking over my new prize. The blueprint for the automated turret was beautiful. It would turn my base from a fortress into a self-defending death trap. "What's the problem?" Anya asked, seeing the thoughtful look on my face. "Don't you have all the raw materials?" "Almost," I said, tapping the schematic on my interface. "It needs a steady power source, but also a specific component to aim and fire. A low-grade targeting crystal, According to the analysis, it's a type of synthesized crystal used in advanced optics research." I pulled up a map, the analysis module highlighting a location automatically. "And the largest local stockpile of them happens to be in the experimental physics lab at the City Tech University." My grin returned. The same lab that houses a small, experimental nuclear reactor. And, if my beta testing memory serves me right, it's also the last known hideout of a wonderfully eccentric, antisocial little genius named Annika Chen. It seemed my next recruitment drive was already planned. One by one, I would gather all the pieces I needed to build my perfect little kingdom at the end of the world. It's funny what you get used to. On day 30 of the world ending, the thing that's really starting to get on my nerves isn't the zombies or the starvation or the general collapse of human decency. It's the damn sound, a constant, faint hissing against the reinforced concrete walls of my bunker. The sound of the world's first ever acid rain. The system called this little gem Phase 2, the atmosphere's fury. Charming. Right now, it was a light drizzle, barely strong enough to tarnish cheap metal and give you an itchy rash if you were dumb enough to stand in it. My analysis module called it a pH of 4.5. Nasty, but not life-threatening. Yet, it was an appetizer, a warning from the game developers that the easy days of just bashing skulls were officially over. From my command center, a room that used to be a dreary military briefing room and was now my personal Batcave, I could watch the misery unfold on a bank of high-definition monitors. My new swarm of mini-drones, little dragonfly-sized bots I'd whipped up in the Universal Fabricator, gave me eyes everywhere within a 2-mile radius. Outside, the slushy gray leftovers from the flash freeze were being washed away by the toxic rain, revealing the grimy asphalt beneath. The frostbitten wanderers, those slow-moving ice zombies, were having a rough time. The acid rain sizzled on their frozen flesh, creating clouds of foul-smelling vapor. Some of them were literally melting in place, their rotting skin sloughing off in bubbling sheets. The system updated their name, corrosive wanderer. Warning, blood is now a minor acidic contact hazard, Gross. And also, a huge pain in the ass for anyone trying to fight them up close. Down in the bunker, life couldn't be better. The air scrubbers kept the air crisp and clean. The internal temperature was a steady 70 degrees. Anya was in her new, fully stocked med bay, methodically analyzing a sample of wanderer blood I'd collected with a drone, a look of intense focus on her face that was equal parts terrifying and attractive. She'd fully embraced her role as my mad scientist. She was happy, safe, productive. That's all I asked for. In the newly converted training hall, the sounds of grunts and impacts echoed. Megan Riley, my new head of security, was putting her 3 surviving officers through hell. Stripped of their old world rules and politeness, she was forging them into killers. My killers. They weren't cops anymore, they were the first soldiers of Asura. When I'd given Megan access to the high nutrition meals from my world seed tree and the healing water from the purifying spring, her physical abilities had skyrocketed. She was faster, stronger, and more ruthless than ever. Her loyalty was absolute, forged in the fires of desperation and cemented with the overwhelming comfort of my resources. She'd gone from a cop trying to uphold a dead system to the warden of a new one. My system. The world outside was starving, but we were planning our dinner menu. They were drinking polluted water, but our spring provided an endless supply of what was essentially a low-grade healing potion. I leaned back in my chair, sipping a mug of coffee made from beans that hadn't existed on this planet 2 months ago, and watched the sad, soggy apocalypse on my screens. This, right here, was the pinnacle of existence. Then, one of my perimeter drones picked up a new signal. A big one, a shuffling, disorganized column of people, maybe 100 of them, emerging from the skeletal remains of a suburban neighborhood to the east. They looked like a moving garbage pile. Everyone was thin, clad in rags, their faces etched with the kind of deep, weary despair that only comes from knowing you're completely screwed. At their head, however, was a man who walked with a different kind of energy. He wasn't shuffling, he was striding. He had a neatly trimmed beard, a clean-ish-looking windbreaker, and the over-enunciated, righteous posture of a man who thought he was the main character of a story where everyone else was a supporting cast member. My drone zoomed in. The analysis module piped up in my head. Backquote, name, Justin Price. Title, Community Organizer, Pre-Collapse. Threat level, delusional. Backquote. Oh, wonderful. A professional talker. A guy whose only skill was making other people feel guilty. In the old world, he'd probably been a nightmare at PTA meetings. In this world, he was a predator of a different sort, one who used words like hope and humanity as weapons to leech off the prepared. Anya, Megan, I said into my comlink. My voice echoed softly through the bunker. We have visitors. A big group of them. Looks like the rumors of our little slice of heaven have spread. Within a minute, they were both standing behind me, looking at the main screen. Megan's eyes narrowed, her hand instinctively resting on the pistol holstered at her hip. 100, maybe more. What's the plan, Commander? Anya was more clinical. They're heavily malnourished. I can see signs of exposure and what looks like early-stage scurvy on a few of them. Their clothes are rotting off from the rain. I took another sip of coffee. The plan, I said, a slow grin spreading across my face, is to enjoy the show. Justin Price led his flock of misery right up to my front gate. It was a 10-inch thick slab of tungsten adamantium alloy. A single bullet from a tank wouldn't scratch it. To them, it must have looked like the gates of God's own fortress. Justin stopped about 50 feet away, cleared his throat, and began to project his voice. It was the a little too loud, a little too polished voice of a man used to a microphone. Hello, in the fortress. My name is Justin Price. We are peaceful survivors. We have women, children, and the elderly with us. We have seen your lights. We know you have safety in there. He paused for dramatic effect. The pathetic crowd behind him murmured, their eyes fixed on the unmoving gate with a desperate, hungry light. In the name of our shared humanity, I am asking you to open your doors. We must work together to rebuild. We must share what we have to protect the weak. True strength is not in high walls, but in open hearts. Let us build a new community, together, based on compassion and equality. I almost choked on my coffee from laughing. Compassion and equality? Buddy, this wasn't a city council election. This was the apocalypse. His community was a herd of liabilities, and he was the shepherd trying to lead them to a new pasture to strip bare. My pasture. Megan, I said, turning my chair around. Gear up. Full tactical. Go up on the rampart. No need for me to dignify this clown with my presence. What are my orders? She asked, her expression like stone. Simple. You are the voice of Asura. Tell them the rules. We are not a charity. We are a meritocracy. Skilled people can apply for entry. The rest can get lost. Be firm. I paused, then added, and have a little fun with it. You've earned it. A flicker of a smile, sharp and dangerous, crossed her lips. Yes, Commander. A few minutes later, a heavy metal hatch slid open on the wall 20 feet above the gate, and Megan stepped out onto the parapet. She was a vision of pure, unadulterated power. Clad in black, state-of-the-art tactical armor I'd fabricated for her, a sleek assault rifle held at a low ready. She looked less like a cop and more like a Valkyrie judging the unworthy. The crowd below gasped. Justin Price's face lit up, thinking he was about to get a negotiation. Ah, a representative, he boomed. I am Justin Price. We come in peace, asking only for shelter and sustenance. This is the Asura Collective. Megan's voice cut through his, amplified by her helmet's external speaker. It was cold, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. We are not a refugee camp. Justin's smile faltered. I don't understand. We are all survivors. We must help each other. We help those who are helpful, Megan stated. We have no room for passengers. If you have a verifiable skill, engineering, advanced medicine, combat experience, agricultural science, step forward. You may submit an application. Everyone else is a drain on resources we do not share. The crowd stirred uneasily. A few people, a man in a tattered electrician's uniform and a woman clutching a worn medical textbook, took a hesitant step forward before being pulled back by their neighbors. Justin's face was turning red. His entire worldview, his entire source of power, was based on moral grandstanding. And Megan had just told him his morals were worthless currency here. This is inhuman, he shouted, his voice cracking. You have so much. We have nothing. You hoard your safety while children suffer. You are a monster, a puppet for whatever tyrant is hiding behind those walls. Megan tilted her head slightly. I could feel her amusement even from my command center. Tyrant? No. He is a leader, and you are a beggar who thinks shouting makes him a king. She raised her rifle, not to aim it, but to make a point. This is the law of Asura. We take what we want. We keep what we earn. We do not subsidize weakness. She paused, letting the words sink in. Leave, now, never, Justin bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at her. We will not be intimidated by your greed. We will stay right here until your conscience forces you to open that gate. We will show you the meaning of true community. I sighed. Some people just don't learn. Megan didn't even reply. She calmly raised her rifle to the sky and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the gunshot was deafening. It echoed across the industrial park, a single, sharp syllable of absolute authority. The crowd screamed and fell back. Justin stumbled, his face turning from red to a pasty white. Megan's voice came back over the speaker, now laced with ice. That was a warning. The next one will be aimed at whichever part of you is making the most noise. The Asura Collective does not negotiate. This is your first and final notice. She then turned, without another word, and disappeared back inside the hatch, which slid shut with a final, definitive boom. Silence. The crowd stared at the gate, then at Justin. The spell was broken. He wasn't their glorious leader who could talk his way into paradise. He was just a man with a loud voice who had almost gotten them all shot. The few skilled people in the crowd were now looking at the gate with a new expression, calculation. The rest just looked terrified. Justin, humiliated and furious, didn't leave. He was too proud. He ordered his flock to set up a miserable camp a few hundred yards away, just within sight of the gate. A pathetic little protest city of damp blankets and simmering resentment. He probably thought his silent, judgmental presence would wear me down. Idiot. He had no idea what he was dealing with. Later that night, the acid rain picked up. It wasn't a drizzle anymore. It was a downpour, streaking down my monitor screens. The pH was probably dropping. I watched through a drone's thermal camera as Justin's people huddled together for warmth, their makeshift shelters offering no real protection. They were miserable, and they were about to turn on each other. The turret blueprint is still waiting, Anya said, coming to stand beside me with a datapad. I've cross-referenced the materials. We have everything we need, except one thing. The low-grade targeting crystal. I finished for her. I know. Our next objective. City Tech University. Annika Chen. A genius, but a recluse. Finding her was going to be a mission in itself. A proximity alert suddenly blared from the console. It was a soft chime, not an alarm, indicating a single, non-hostile life form. I toggled the view to the camera right above the main gate. Someone was there, a girl, young, maybe early 20s, emaciated and soaked to the bone by the acid rain, which was visibly smoking off her thin jacket. Her face was a mess of bruises, her lip was split, and she was leaning against the cold metal of my gate as if it were the last solid thing in the universe. She weakly raised a hand and banged it against the alloy, the sound a dull, pathetic thud. She looked like she was from Justin's camp, probably a scapegoat for their misery. A victim of the community he was so proud of. My first thought was pragmatic. A liability. My second thought was from the beta tester in me. Analyze everything. I focused my will, linking my own system to the gate's external sensors. The analysis module activated. A data box popped into my vision. Name, Annika Chen. Title, PhD candidate, experimental physics and applied cybernetics. Status, critical, malnourished, physical trauma, stage 1 acid exposure. Threat level, none. My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. I stared at the screen, then at the name, then back at the screen. Annika Chen, the one person I needed for the next stage of my fortress. The one genius I was planning a whole damn expedition to go find. And she had just been delivered to my front door like a pizza. Beaten, half dead, but here. Justin Price, the self-righteous idiot, had hounded and cast out the very key I needed to make my kingdom unassailable. A wide, predatory grin spread across my face. It was the kind of grin a hacker gets when he doesn't just crash the server, but discovers the server admin accidentally handed him the root password on a silver platter. Megan, I said into the comm, my voice vibrating with dark amusement. Open the gate. We have a new applicant. The grinding shriek of 10-inch thick tungsten adamantium alloy sliding open was a sound that could curdle your blood. To the half-dead girl slumped against it, it must have sounded like the sky cracking apart. My first instinct, the cold, calculating part of me that had kept me alive this long, was screaming about contamination protocols. The pragmatic bastard in my head was already running a cost-benefit analysis on the medical supplies she burned through. But the beta tester in me, the one who saw the world as a series of quests and loot drops, was screaming louder. Jackpot. Megan, get the decontamination chamber online, I barked into the comms. Anya, prep for emergency trauma. Stage 1 acid exposure, malnutrition, and blunt force injuries. She's a priority 1. On it, Commander, their voices replied in unison, a symphony of perfect, calm competence. The massive gate slid fully open, revealing Annika Chen crumpled on the ferroconcrete entrance platform. The acid rain, now a steady, hissing downpour, sizzled around her, eating at the patches of her cheap jacket worn thin. She looked up, her one good eye widening as two figures in full environmental gear, my generic hazmat grunts, rushed out, grabbing her under the arms. They didn't carry her with gentle pity, they moved with the efficient, practiced motions of a pit crew, hauling her inside before the gate began to hiss shut again. From my command center, I watched it all unfold on the monitors. A few hundred yards away, in the pathetic shantytown of wet blankets and despair, Justin Price's little flock stirred. They saw the gate open. They saw us take someone in. The look on Justin's face, even through the grainy, rain-streaked drone camera, was a priceless mixture of shock, outrage, and something I recognized all too well, the dawning belief that his moral grandstanding had actually worked. Oh, you sweet, stupid summer child. You have no idea what you just did. While Anya and her new nurse assistant went to work on Annika in the med bay, I turned my attention to a different monitor. A drone was hovering over Justin's camp, its thermal sensors painting a grim picture. The rain was getting worse. Puddles on the asphalt were now bubbling faintly, a sign the pH was dropping below 4.0. Dangerous. I watched as one of the corrosive wanderers, its flesh already half melted, stumbled into one of these larger puddles. It was not a pleasant sight. The creature's legs dissolved into a gray, chunky slurry. But it didn't die, the goo just spread. The rotted flesh, bone, and acidic rainwater congealed, forming a pulsating, amoeba-like mass. The system pinged with an update. Evolved species detected, acidic slime. Threat level, low, single, moderate, group. Special ability, engulf. Caution, highly corrosive to standard alloys and organic matter. Fantastic. The world was literally turning into a toxic soup monster. And Justin's little community, with their rotting sneakers and threadbare tents, were camped right on the edge of the spawning pool. Darwinism in action, folks. I almost felt bad for them. Almost. A buzz from my private comm. It was Anya. Caleb, get down here. The acid concentration in her wounds is higher than the ambient rainfall. It's clinging to her tissue. The standard neutralizers aren't working fast enough. I can't start stitches until I get it under control, or it'll just eat her from the inside out. I was in the med bay in 30 seconds. Annika was laid out on a sterile table, stripped of her ruined clothes and covered by a thermal blanket. Anya, calm and focused, was pointing to angry red welts on the girl's arms and back, where the acidic fabric had been pressed against her skin. The flesh was weeping a clear, viscous fluid. The cells are saturated, Anya said, her brow furrowed. It's like the acid has bonded with them. I've never seen anything like it. Of course you haven't. This wasn't chemistry. This was game mechanics. The developers who designed this nightmare were sadists with a flair for the dramatic. I took a deep breath. Time for a little magic trick. Stand back, I told Anya. She gave me a questioning look but obeyed instantly. That was the beauty of my team. Absolute trust. I leaned over Annika, placing my hand gently on her shoulder, away from the worst of the burns. I closed my eyes, focusing my will. The world dissolved into lines of code, a green on black cascade of data that only I could see. My protocol rewriter ability came online. I targeted Annika's biological signature, a complex string of flickering data. Target, Annika Chen. Human, female, status, critical, active debuff, corrosive touch, tier 1, initiate protocol rewrite, Y-N, I visualized the command. It wasn't about knowing a programming language, it was about imposing my intent on the system's code. Greater than underscore apply underscore buff, target equals, Annika underscore Chen, buff equals, acid underscore immunity underscore temporary, duration equals, 300 underscore seconds, area equals, epidermis, For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a subtle shimmer, like heat haze, washed over Annika's skin. The angry red welts instantly stopped weeping. The faint sizzle of acid reacting with tissue went silent. Anya gasped. What did you do? The cellular corrosion, it just stopped. Gave you a 5-minute window, I said, my voice steady despite the mental drain. Work fast. She didn't ask any more questions. She just nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of awe and renewed determination, and got to work. As she began cleaning and disinfecting the now inert wounds, Annika's eyes fluttered open. They were hazy with pain, but they fixed on me. They weren't just looking at a savior. They were looking at a miracle. And in a world this broken, a miracle is the strongest currency there is. Just as Anya was applying the last bandage, Megan's voice came over my earpiece, sharp and clipped. Commander, we've got a situation topside. Justin Price and his fan club are at the gate. He's demanding to speak with you. Says he has a community proclamation. I couldn't help it. I laughed, a quiet, dark chuckle that made the freshly bandaged Annika flinch slightly. A proclamation? I repeated into the calm. This ought to be good. I'll be right up. I gave Anya a nod. Keep her stable. Get some broth from the nutrient paste dispenser into her as soon as she can take it. I walked to the command center, not even bothering to put on tack gear. I just grabbed the sleek, custom-made pistol from my desk holster and slid it into the back of my waistband. I toggled the external comm system, routing my voice through the speakers on the parapet. Justin Price was standing there, puffed up like a pigeon in a dust bath, a piece of cardboard in his hand. He'd clearly been practicing his speech. To the leader of the fortress, he boomed, his voice shaking with self-importance. We, the Willow Creek community survivors, saw your act of compassion. You took in that poor girl, Annika. Your humanity has finally awakened. I waited. The silence stretched, making him antsy. We knew you couldn't be a complete monster, he continued, getting into his rhythm. Now, as an act of good faith, we demand you turn over the men who assaulted her. They must face justice. A community trial. It is the only way to build a new world based on righteousness and accountability. He was trying to use my actions to validate his authority. He wanted to make an example of someone to prove he was still the leader. It was the most transparent, pathetic power play I'd ever seen. Behind him, a few thuggish-looking men were starting to look nervous, while the rest of the crowd murmured in agreement. Idiots. A whole herd of them. Time to end this clown show. I strode out onto the parapet myself. No helmet, no body armor. Just me, in a clean black t-shirt and cargo pants, looking down at the bedraggled mob. The acid rain was still falling, but it parted around me, sizzling into nothingness a few inches from my skin. A neat little passive effect I'd picked up from a tier 1 elemental resistance shard, To them, it must have looked like I was bending the very laws of nature. Justin Price stared, his mouth hanging open. The crowd went dead silent. This wasn't the faceless tyrant they'd imagined. Let me get this straight, I said, my amplified voice calm and quiet, yet cutting through the hiss of the rain. You took in a brilliant young woman. Your community starved her, beat her, and threw her out to die. Now she's in my med bay, being treated by a world-class doctor. And you, the ringleader of the mob that abused her, are standing at my gate demanding justice? Justin's face went from pale to beet red. She was a hoarder. She stole food. There were rules. Your rules are garbage. I cut him off. My gate, my medic, my resources, my rules. I turned my head slightly, speaking into my comm. Annika, can you hear me? A weak, raspy voice came through the external speakers, broadcast for all to hear. Yes. Good. Can you see the monitor I've patched to your room? Yes. Point them out. The ones who did this to you. There was a pause. Then, her voice, stronger now, laced with pure, unadulterated venom. The big one in the blue hoodie. Him, and the two on his left. The one with the face tattoo and the one with the baseball bat. The three men in question went white as sheets. The crowd instinctively shuffled away from them. Justin sputtered, "This is madness. You can't just." "I can," I said, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. I reached behind my back and pulled out the pistol. It wasn't for them. Not yet. I held it out flat on my palm. "Megan, open the gate just enough for one person." The gate ground open a few feet. A moment later, Annika appeared, supported by Megan. She was pale and wrapped in a blanket, but her eyes were twin flames of hatred. She stared at the three men who had nearly killed her. I tossed the pistol to Megan, who caught it effortlessly. She checked the safety, then pressed the gun into Annika's trembling hands, her own steady hands guiding the girl's grip. "What is this?" Justin shrieked, his voice cracking. "What are you doing?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the parapet, a casual observer at the theater. "This is the law of Asura," I announced, my voice booming across the plaza. "We do not have community trials. We do not subsidize weakness, and we do not tolerate hypocrisy. We have only one kind of justice here." I looked down at Annika, my eyes meeting hers. "An eye for an eye. They are outside my walls. Their lives are yours to take. This is your choice. Settle your debt." For a second, she hesitated. The old world, with its laws and morals, was fighting a desperate battle in her mind. Then she looked at the smirking, terrified faces of her tormentors, and the last vestiges of that dead world burned away. Her hands steadied. The look in her eyes was no longer that of a victim. It was the look of a predator. She raised the gun. Crack. The first shot was messy, hitting the man in the blue hoodie in the shoulder. He screamed and went down. The crowd panicked, a wave of shrieking chaos. Crack. Crack. The next two shots were better. The man with the face tattoo and the man with the bat both dropped like sacks of garbage, dark holes appearing in their chests. Guided by Megan, who acted as a human shooting rest, Annika put one more round into the first man, silencing his screams for good. Silence. The only sounds were the hissing rain and the whimpering of Justin Price. His righteous community had just become a crime scene. His moral authority had evaporated in 3 puffs of cordite. Annika stood there, shaking, the gun smoking in her hands. Then Megan gently took it from her and guided her back inside. The gate slammed shut, a final, metallic exclamation point on the day's lesson. I looked down at the shattered remains of the Willow Creek community survivors. Some were staring at the bodies in horror. Others were looking at my fortress with a new kind of fear and respect. The smarter ones, like the electrician and the woman with the medical textbook I'd seen earlier, were already detaching themselves from the group, their faces full of cold calculation. Justin Price just stood there, a broken man, staring at the blood pooling in the acid rain. His great social experiment was over. He hadn't just been defeated. He'd been rendered utterly and completely irrelevant. And in the apocalypse, irrelevance is a death sentence. Later, after the crowd had scattered and a few actual skilled survivors had been processed through decontamination for interviews, Annika was sitting up in her med bay bed. She was quiet, but the look in her eyes was one of unbreakable, fanatical loyalty. I had not just saved her life. I had given her vengeance. I had given her power. "I looked at the schematics for the primary reactor while you were busy," she said, her voice still hoarse. "The energy conduits are inefficiently routed. I can redesign the flow matrix. Increase power output by at least 50% with the same fuel consumption." I just nodded. "Good. Get some rest. You can start tomorrow." As I turned to leave, she spoke again. "There's something else. In the sub-level utility tunnels. I saw them on the bunker schematics. Shielded fiber optic lines, military grade. Most of it is probably dormant, but if we can get a server rack running, we could have a closed network. A secure intranet, a private, unhackable network. Communication, data processing, a command and control system for the fortress that no one from the outside could touch. The possibilities were staggering. My 3 cornerstones were now in place. Anya, the angel of life and death in the med bay. Megan, the Valkyrie of violence guarding the walls. And now Annika, the techno-prophet who would turn this bunker into a smart fortress. The machine of Asura was finally complete. That night, Annika, with a fervor that bordered on obsession, guided me and a few grunts through the process of reactivating the old server room. We powered up the dusty racks, and with a few keystrokes on a salvaged terminal, she brought the network to life. Green lights blinked on one by one, a constellation of newfound potential. And then, something unexpected happened. As the system finished its boot sequence, a hidden partition flashed on the main screen. It wasn't part of the bunker's original OS. It was something else, something I recognized instantly from my beta testing days. A ghost in the machine. It wasn't a message, it was a countdown timer. Hidden beta quest activated. The first feast, time remaining, 71 hours 59 minutes and 48 seconds. Objective. Deliver the killing blow to the area world boss, the Gourmand, before the timer expires. Reward for first clear. Blueprint, Spatial Core Engine, My heart hammered in my chest. The Spatial Core Engine, the key to the final upgrade for my fortress. The key to making my home a mobile, untraceable, teleporting god machine. The race wasn't just against the other survivors anymore. The game itself had just put me on the clock.